Vera Chadwick, a farmer's wife and mother of 3 children, stands accused of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. It is alleged that in August this year, in the kitchen of her father's cottage, she shot and seriously injured John Worsley. Mrs. Chadwick pleads not guilty.
All stand.
Inspector Thompson, on the morning of August the 14th, were you the senior officer on duty at the Divisional Police Station in North Fulborough?
I was, sir.
And were you alerted to an incident at the property known as Church Cottage off Plantation Lane near the village of Stubcroft?
I was, sir.
And would you please tell us what you found there?
May I refer to my notes, Your Honour?
When did you make them?
About 1 hour after the events themselves, Your Honour.
Yes, very well, Inspector.
Thank you, Your Honour. In company with Sergeant Wilson, I reached Church Cottage at 10:52 a.m. The house stands by itself at the end of a narrow lane. Blocking this lane near the house was a saloon car. I had to move this vehicle before the police car could reach the house.
So, in fact, you were the first person on the scene?
Yes, sir.
And on reaching Church Cottage, Inspector, what did you find?
Considerable confusion, sir. The first person I saw was an elderly man, whom I later learned to be Mr. Edward Lumsden, the tenant of the property. He was sitting on the ground with his back to the wall of the house, apparently in a state of shock. I said to him, "What's the trouble here?"
And he replied?
No, sir. He seemed unable to speak. He just shook his head. I then saw a young woman whom I now know to be Miss Margaret Stone. She came round the corner of the house carrying a double-barreled shotgun. She handed me the shotgun and said, "You had better take charge of this. It has done enough damage."
Yes. Well, may he be shown Exhibit 1, please? Do you recognize it, Inspector?
Yes, sir. That is the shotgun Miss Stone handed to me.
Thank you. Would you continue with your account, please?
Having made sure the gun was safe, I handed it to my companion, Sergeant Wilson, and proceeded round the back of the cottage to the back door. This door was hanging inwards, sir, as if forced in, with the hinges broken. Inside the kitchen, lying on the floor, was an injured man.
And this was Mr. John Worsley?
Yes, sir, so I subsequently ascertained. He had evidently been shot and was bleeding from the head, shoulder, and left arm. He was just conscious, sir, and evidently in considerable pain.
Was he alone in the kitchen?
No, sir. The accuser's with him, Vera Chadwick. She was kneeling on the floor, holding the injured man by the head and wiping his face. She was crying, sir. I said to her, "What has happened here?" She replied, "I have killed him. Oh, God, I have killed him."
I have killed him. I see. What happened then?
The ambulance then arrived, sir. Mr. Worsley was taken to Fulchester General Hospital to be treated for his injuries. At this point, I cautioned the accused, and she replied, "He should not have been here. He tried to steal my dad's house."
He tried to steal my dad's house?
Yes, sir. I then showed her the shotgun and asked if it was her property. She replied, "No, it is Frank's."
Who is Frank?
Frank Chadwick is the accused husband, Your Honour. The shotgun is licensed in his name. I then said, "Did you shoot him?" meaning the young man, Your Honour. And she replied, "Yes, it was me. He should not have been here."
So, you asked the accused if she shot Mr. Worsley, and she replied, "Yes, it was me."
Yes, sir.
Right.
The accused was then taken to Fulchester Police Station, where she was later charged.
Right. Thank you, Inspector.
Now, Inspector, you've told us that you were on duty at the North Fulborough Station on the morning of August the 14th when you were alerted to an incident at Church Cottage. Were you surprised?
Surprised, sir? I don't think I understand that question, sir. We get a good many incidents referred to us every day.
Well, let me put the question another way. When you received word of an incident at Church Cottage, were you expecting it?
Your Honour, I fail to see the relevance of the Inspector's anticipations.
Well, Mr. Ferguson?
Your Honour, the emotional atmosphere in which the shooting occurred is crucial in this case, and I hope the answer to my question will shed light on the atmosphere which prevailed.
Very well, Mr. Ferguson, you may put the question.
Thank you, Your Honour. Now, Inspector, were you expecting trouble at Church Cottage?
No, sir, I wasn't. Not serious trouble. If I had been expecting trouble, sir, I would have taken steps to prevent it.
Nevertheless, on August the 13th, the day before Mr. Worsley's shooting, You received a telephone call regarding Church Cottage, did you not?
Yes, sir, from Mr. Edward Lumsden, the tenant of Church Cottage.
Yes, and Mr. Lumsden is the accused's father.
Yes, sir. He telephoned the North Fulchester station, was eventually put through to me. He said somebody had stolen his house. I asked him what he meant by this, and it turned out there were squatters in it. He'd been away from home for a couple of weeks, sir, just got back. He seemed to want the police to go up to the cottage and arrest the squatters. I had to explain to him we couldn't do this.
But this was a cry for help.
He wanted help, sir, yes. I told him the best thing he could do was to see a solicitor right away.
Well, in other words, you wouldn't help him.
No, sir, I did help as best I could by suggesting he obtain legal advice. You see, sir, in the previous few days, there'd been 4 other cottages in the area occupied by squatters, all members of this Action Homeless campaign from the university, sir. These people know just what they're doing. They use the law to their own advantage. We have to be very careful how we proceed.
Am I right in thinking, Inspector, that the Fulchester force received a rap over the knuckles last year for somewhat precipitous action in a case involving squatters who were forcibly ejected?
Yes, Your Honour.
Would it be true to say that the police force is reluctant to become involved in squatting cases without obvious criminal offence?
Oh, yes, Your Honour.
Thank you. Proceed, Mr.
Thank you, Your Honour. So, when Mr. Lumsden told you that the squatters had taken over his home, you told him that the police would take no action.
Not exactly, sir. I told him we'd make inquiries. But from what he told me, that's about all we could do, sir.
I see. And on the following day, the day of Mr. Worsley's shooting, how far had you got with these inquiries?
Well, we haven't, sir. You see, in the 4 other cases referred to us, all squats made by the same group, we'd found no criminal offence by the squatters. In each case, we advised the owner of the property to seek legal action through the courts, just as I advised Mr. Lumsden.
Yes, but these 4 other cases of squatting involved holiday cottages, did they not?
Yes, sir.
Whereas Church Cottage, far from being anyone's holiday retreat, is Mr. Lumsden's one and only home.
Yes, indeed, sir. So I understood. And if Mr. Lumsden had been the owner of the property, not just the tenant, well, we might have risked action, sir. But it's a very tricky area of the law, sir, as perhaps you may be aware.
Thank you, Inspector. Yes, I am aware of the law. And so the day following Mr. Lumsden's appeal to you and your no doubt regretful refusal to interfere, you were called to an incident at Church Cottage. So you were not surprised.
Really, Your Honour, the witness has already been asked this question and answered it fully.
So, Mr. Unwin, we're in no doubt as to your views on this matter, Mr. Ferguson, and we really must get on.
Now, Inspector, you've told us that the shotgun, the property of the defendant's husband, was handed to you as soon as you arrived at Church Cottage.
Yes, sir, by Miss Margaret Stone.
Ah, yes, by Miss Stone. Yes, we shall be hearing a great deal about that lady in due course. Now, Inspector, did you examine the gun?
Well, I checked the gun to see if either barrel was loaded, sir. It wasn't. But, of course, a more thorough examination was made later at the police station.
What did that examination show?
One barrel had been fired recently, sir. The other barrel not for some considerable time, a matter of weeks.
So on August the 14th, only one of the 2 barrels had been fired. I mean, you've told us that the gun was empty when it was handed to you, so unless someone else unloaded the 2nd barrel after Mr. Worsley's shooting, only one of the barrels had in fact been loaded.
Yes, sir.
Now, did you ask Miss Stone if she had unloaded the 2nd barrel?
Yes, sir. She said she hadn't. She'd merely taken possession of the gun after Mr. Worsley's shooting.
Yes. Now, after Miss Stone had handed you the shotgun, and you went into the kitchen where you found the injured man and the defendant, what was the defendant wearing?
A dress of some sort, sir. No, not a dress exactly. One of those things that women wear in the kitchen, sir. A pinny?
Yes, a pinafore, yes. So Mrs. Chadwick drove the 30 miles from her own home to her father's cottage wearing a pinafore.
Apparently so, sir.
And when you entered the kitchen, where the injured man was lying, Mrs. Chadwick was attending to the injured man, cradling his head?
Yes, sir.
And crying, you said?
Yes, sir.
Now, when the ambulance arrived, Inspector, and Mr. Worsley was put into it to be taken to the hospital, what did the defendant do?
She tried to get into the ambulance with him, sir.
Why was that?
She said she wanted to go to the hospital with him to look after him on the way. I had to restrain her, sir.
Oh, why? Was she hysterical?
No, sir.
Agitated and upset?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now, you've described the defendant as attending to the injured man, crying, you said, evidently upset, wanting to go into the ambulance with him to accompany him to the hospital. Now, is that the behaviour of a woman who'd set out coldly and determinedly to inflict grievous damage on a fellow creature?
Oh, really? Your Honour.
Quite. You know perfectly well, Mr. Ferguson, that this question you attempted to put to the witness is the very question which the jury will have to decide.
You are John Andrew Worsley of Flat 5, 23 Burgundy Street, Fulchester.
Yes.
And you're a second-year student at Fulchester University?
Yes.
And on August the 14th at Church Cottage, did you suffer shotgun wounds?
Yes, I did.
Now, Mr. Worsley, the court has heard details of your injuries and treatment from Dr. Ramsden. But would you tell us what the long-term effects of your injuries have been?
I've lost the sight of one eye.
I must ask you to speak louder, Mr. Worsley. I can scarcely hear you. I'm sure the jury can't. Will you please answer that question again?
I'm blind in my left eye.
And that is a permanent condition?
Obviously, yes.
Now, Mr. Worsley, will you explain what you were doing at Church Cottage in the first place?
Well, I was squatting. It was part of a campaign to take over empty houses and move homeless families into them.
I see. And were you alone?
No, Margaret was there too, Margaret Stone.
Just one other person. Now, when did you enter Church Cottage?
It was August the 12th, 2 days before I got shot.
I see. Now, Mr. Worsley, I'm going to ask you about the events of that day, August the 14th. Will you tell us what happened on that morning?
We saw the old man was outside again.
Yes, you're referring, of course, to Mr. Lumsden, the tenant of the cottage.
Yeah, Mr. Lumsden. We saw him outside when we first looked out of the window that morning. And then, a bit later on, a car came up and pulled up at the end of the lane that leads to the house. At first we thought it was a friend of ours because we were expecting him to come from Fulchester with a family that had nowhere to live. And then we saw it wasn't a friend. It was a woman carrying a gun.
Can you see that woman now?
Yes, that's her.
Yes, yes, the accused, Vera Chadwick. And what did she do?
Well, she talked to the old man, Mr. Lumsden, for a while, and then she came up to the front door and hammered on it.
With a gun?
No, with her hand. She banged on the door and she shouted at us to come out. We were upstairs looking down from the front bedroom window.
And did you come out?
No. Margaret said to her she was wasting her time banging and shouting like that. She told her we weren't coming out and we weren't going to hand the house over.
Just a moment. I'm rather puzzled. You say that your motive for squatting in this cottage was to provide accommodation for homeless people.
Yeah.
Yet by occupying this house, you were making the tenant, Mr. Lumsden, homeless.
Well, yes, but we didn't know that. We thought the house was Mr. Lumsden's holiday cottage, his second home. Well, it was a mistake.
Yes, it was indeed. Carry on, Mr. Unwin.
Right. And what did the accused do then?
Well, she tried pushing at the door a bit, but she couldn't get in. It was a big, heavy door and it was bolted. Then she started swearing at us. And then she went a little way away with Mr. Lumsden behind the car into some trees so we couldn't see them. It was like that for about 20 minutes. Then I saw the old man, Mr. Lumsden. He came up to the front door and he had a big, heavy stick and he started hammering on it. I knew he couldn't get in, but anyway, we went downstairs and we got hold of a chest of drawers from the front room and we dragged it into the passage behind the front door. And then, all of a sudden, we heard a crash from the back of the house.
See, what sort of a crash?
Well, like somebody breaking wood. And Margaret said to me, "Stay here, guard the front door," and she ran to the kitchen where the back door is.
And you stayed at the front door?
Yeah.
I see. Well, what happened after your companion left to run to the kitchen?
Well, the old man was still banging on the front door and shouting, and then I heard another crash from the back of the house.
Well, a similar crash to the first one?
Yeah. And then I heard Margaret shouting.
I see. And what did she shout?
Well, I don't remember exactly. Everything happened so fast, and there was all the banging at the front door. It was just something like, "Get out, get out."
I see. So what did you do?
Well, I ran through the house to the kitchen. I ran through the front room, and I flung open the kitchen door.
And what did you see in the kitchen?
Well, she was in. Mrs. Chadwick. The back door was open. We'd bolted it, but she'd busted in somehow. It was hanging all wrong. Well, when I opened the door from the front room, I stopped because of the gun. And she turned towards me, and I saw the gun come up.
You say the accused turned towards you
Yes.
and raised the gun.
Yes.
How far away was the accused?
The length of the kitchen, about 15 feet, I suppose, perhaps a bit more.
Rather closer than I am to you now.
Yes.
I see. So the accused turned towards you and raised the gun. And then what happened?
Well, I'm not very clear about it. I put my arm up in front of my face to try and protect myself. I sort of got my shoulder up. And then I felt as if I'd been slammed on the head. And there was a tremendous noise. And I'm afraid I don't really remember much else. Not till after, not till I was in the hospital.
Thank you, Mr. Worsley. Will you wait there, please?
Now, Mr. Worsley, you've told us that you occupied Church Cottage on August the 12th. Did you break in?
No, definitely not. There was a window left open, and I got in through that.
I see. Thereby avoiding prosecution under the statute of forcible entry and the Criminal Damage Act. Yes, obviously, your action group knows its way around the law. Who's your legal expert, you?
No, Margaret is. Well, I mean, we all know quite a bit about squatting and the law.
Yes, you mentioned Margaret. That would be your companion at Mr. Lumsden's cottage, Margaret Stone.
Yes.
Did you know that Mr. Lumsden lived in the cottage?
Well, no, we didn't.
I see. You just liked the look of it, did you, and picked it at random?
No, of course not. It wasn't like that. We thought the house was Mr. Lumsden's holiday cottage.
Oh, I see. You thought. You didn't care enough to establish the facts.
It wasn't at all like that. We thought we did know the facts. Well, some of us feel strongly enough about homeless families to want to do something about it. And when you see holiday cottages standing empty most of the year while other people have nowhere to live, well, we got Mr. Lumsden's house mixed up with another one. His house is called Church Cottage. There's another one called Church House about 2 miles away. That is a holiday cottage. We got the two confused.
Yes, it sounds as though you and your friends are rather confused people.
It's the only mistake we've
No?
made.
Oh, was it, Mr. Worsley? Yes, well, we'll see. Now, this plan to occupy other people's holiday homes, whose idea was that?
Well, several of us decided to do it.
Yes, but who proposed this particular action?
I don't remember now.
Was it Margaret Stone?
I don't know.
Are you sure you don't know?
Well, it might have been Margaret. I mean, it's possible.
I see. But it was definitely Miss Stone who occupied Mr. Lumsden's cottage with you, wasn't it, on August the 12th?
Yes.
And then this country idyll was rather spoilt, wasn't it, because Mr. Lumsden came back, didn't he?
Yes.
When was that?
It was the day after we'd moved in, the 13th, in the evening.
I see. Mr. Lumsden came into his house and he found you there, did he?
Well, no, he couldn't come into his house.
No? Why not?
We'd changed the locks.
Oh, well, that was very thoughtful of you, Mr. Worsley. Mr. Lumsden comes back to his own home, finds he can't get in, because you've changed the locks. What happened then?
Well, Margaret opened the bedroom window and explained to him what we were doing.
Oh, in what words?
She told him that the Action Homeless Campaign Group had moved in to take over accommodation that wasn't occupied by its owner to use for a family that had nowhere to live.
And what did Mr. Lumsden say to that?
Well, looking back on it now, I don't think he really grasped the situation at first. He was shouting about burglars. Well, I explained to him that we weren't burglars, we were squatters.
Oh, well, that must have been a great comfort to him.
Well, we didn't know it was his proper home. He never told us. If he told us it was his
Well,
proper
if
home...
he told you that, Mr. Worsley, what would you have said?
Well...
Would you have asked Margaret Stone for instructions?
No, we'd have moved out. We're not trying to take people's homes away from them. We're trying to get homes for people who have nowhere to live.
Very high-minded. Now, Mr. Worsley, you've told my learned friend, if my note is correct, that when Mr. Lumsden was hammering on the front door of his cottage, suddenly you heard a crash at the back door, and Margaret Stone said to you, "Stay here, guard the front door. Now, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
You're used to receiving instructions from Margaret Stone, aren't you?
I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, of the two of you, Mr. Worsley, yourself and Miss Stone, isn't she the one who gives the orders and you the one who follows them?
She doesn't give me any orders. It's not that sort of relationship.
Huh? Well, perhaps you'd give us an idea what sort of relationship it is.
Oh, Your Honour, I object to this line of inquiry by my learned friend. It's quite irrelevant.
Well, Mr. Ferguson?
Your Honour, I intend to show that the witness's relationship with Miss Stone has a very strong bearing on his evidence.
Very well, Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you, Your Honour. Now, Mr. Worsley, are you and Margaret Stone lovers?
Do I have to answer that?
Yes, Mr. Worsley.
Well, we have been.
Were you lovers at the time that you occupied Mr. Lumsden's cottage?
Yes.
But you're not lovers now?
I was in hospital for 10 weeks. We haven't been able to see as much of each other.
But at the time of the shooting, you were lovers, and you were you not? Very much under Margaret Stone's influence, politically.
We happen to share the same views about most important things. I'm quite capable of thinking for myself.
How old are you, Mr. Worsley?
I'm 20.
Margaret Stone is some years older than you, is she not?
She's a little older than I am, yes, but I don't see there's any significance in that.
But in this squatting programme of yours, this campaign to take over the holiday cottages, is it not true to say that Margaret Stone was the brains and you were just one of the rank and file?
No, certainly not. We're both people who feel very strongly about certain things.
Well, nevertheless, Mr. Worsley, and again, I quote your evidence. Stay here and guard the door, she said. She told you what to do, and you did it.
Well, on that particular occasion...
Yes, but she's told you what to do on many occasions, hasn't she?
No.
Did she tell you what to say in evidence in this court?
Oh, really? Really, Your Honour?
I shall allow the question, Mr. Unwin. You must answer, Mr. Worsley.
She hasn't told me what to say.
You're saying that you haven't talked to her, that you haven't discussed this case with her?
No, of course we've discussed it, lots of times. It's not exactly an everyday occurrence to someone getting shot. I was the one who got shot. She saw it happen. Naturally, we've discussed it.
I suggest to you, Mr. Worsley, that your account of the shooting is not based upon your own memory at all. It's based upon Margaret Stone's version of what happened.
No.
She's told you her version of the events, hasn't she? Over and over again.
No.
And she's instilled it into you? The correct party line, as it were?
No, look, I've told you what happened, and it's what I saw.
Yes. But you didn't see, did you? When the shot was fired, you were cowering against the wall, with your face behind your arms.
No. I saw what happened. She shot me, Mrs. Chadwick. She brought her gun, and she pointed it at me, and she shot me.
The jury in this case is composed of members of the general public. The Queen against Chadwick will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court. Vera Chadwick is now on trial accused of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. It is alleged that in August she shot and seriously injured John Worsley, one of two young students who were squatting in her father's cottage. Mrs. Chadwick's father has just been called to give evidence.
You are Edward Lumsden of Church Cottage, Plantation Lane, Stubcroft.
Yes, I am.
How old are you, Mr. Lumsden?
I'm going on 74.
Perhaps you'd like to sit down while giving your evidence, Mr. Lumsden.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Carry on, Mr. Unwin.
Mr. Lumsden, at the beginning of August last, you left your home and spent a fortnight with your daughter on her farm.
It was Frank's farm, Vera's husband.
Quite so. Then on August the 13th, you returned to your own home.
Yes. Well, I thought it was my own home till I got there. Then I found out it was different.
You found out, in fact, that your house had been taken over by 2 young squatters.
That's right, squatters, that's what they call themselves. I put my key in the lock and nothing happened. I thought I had the wrong key. Damn me, the key was right enough. It was the lock that was wrong. They'd taken my lock off and put a new one on.
Now, these squatters, Mr. Lumsden, did you speak to them?
Of course I did. I told them to clear off. They wouldn't go. One of them, that young woman, she leaned out of my bedroom window and said she'd taken my house off me.
We've heard evidence that these squatters believed your house to be a holiday cottage, Mr. Lumsden. Did they express this belief to you?
What?
Did these squatters say anything to indicate that they thought your house was a holiday cottage?
No.
I see, thank you.
It was my home, Your Honour. I just got back from my holidays. I'd been at my daughter's helping them get the hay in.
Yes, I understand that. Carry on, Mr. Drummond.
And when these squatters refused to leave, Mr. Lumsden, what did you do?
I went to phone for the police. I couldn't use the phone in my own house. I couldn't get in there to use it. And Vera had it put in for emergencies.
Yes, well, where did you phone from?
I walked to Stubcraft and used the box across the road from the pub.
You spoke to Inspector Thompson at North Fulborough Police Station, did you not?
Yes, Thompson.
And what was the result of your conversation?
Bugger all.
Oh.
Begging Your Honour's pardon, he wouldn't do anything. He said he couldn't touch the squatters if they were clever, and this lot was clever. He said I'd have to go to court to have them evicted.
And did he give you any further advice?
He said to see a solicitor.
And did you?
No, I haven't got money for solicitors. Anyway, once you're in the hands of solicitors, you're worse off than you were before.
So what did you do?
I went back home. I thought they might go out and then I'd slip in. They never showed their faces. They were in my bedroom, both of them. I could hear them.
And in fact, it was not until next morning that you telephoned to the accused, your daughter.
Vera, yes.
In the meantime, Mr. Lumsden, where'd you spent the night?
In my garden shed. They hadn't taken the lock off that.
And when you telephoned your daughter and told her all this, what was her reaction?
Well, she drove over in the car.
Yes, but prior to that, I mean, when you told her what had happened, how did she respond?
Oh, you should have seen her. She was a bit aerated.
She was, what?
Well, she was like het up, Your Honour. Angry about it.
And did she tell you what to do, Mr. Lumsden?
Yes, she told me to go back to my home and wait and keep an eye on things until she got over. You see, it's 30 miles from Vera's.
I see. Will you tell us what happened when your daughter arrived?
Well, she got out of the car and I showed her the squatters. You could see them hanging out of my bedroom window. I said, look. I said, bold as brass. And she said, yeah, they want shooting.
Your daughter said they want shooting?
Yeah, but, not like that. I mean, she didn't mean she wanted to shoot them.
Well, in what way do you think she meant it?
Well, it's like something you say. I mean, you say it about a football team if you're disgusted with them.
Yes, but when your daughter said it, Mr. Lumsden, she was carrying a shotgun, was she not?
Yeah, but she didn't say it the way you mean. I'm sorry, girl. I've let you in it. Shouldn't have brought you in the first place.
In order to give Mr. Lumsden time to compose himself, I shall now take the luncheon adjournment.
All stand.
When your daughter got out of the car, Mr. Lumsden, she was carrying the shotgun.
Yes.
Did you make any comment about that?
Well, I said, what are you doing with Frank's gun?
Frank, that's your son-in-law, yeah. And what did your daughter reply?
She said, well, they'll take notice of this.
She said they'll take notice of this?
Yes.
Now, answer me very carefully, Mr. Lumsden. At any time, did your daughter say anything which indicated to you that the shotgun was loaded?
No, never.
Now, Mr. Lumsden, did your daughter say anything else that might be taken as threats against the squatters?
No, she didn't.
Are you sure? Now, think carefully. Your daughter banged on the front door of your house, did she not? And she told the squatters to come out. Yes.
Yes.
And when they refused, did she not say, "You'll regret this, lady, I will see to that"?
I don't know.
But she made that remark, did she not, to the woman of the two squatters, Miss Margaret Stone?
Well, she was entitled to. That woman, she tried to take my house off me. Cold-hearted bitch.
Well, in other words, Mr. Lumsden, your daughter did make that threat.
No, it wasn't a threat.
Well, then, what would you call it, Mr. Lumsden?
Well, I don't know, but it wasn't a threat, though.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Lumsden.
How long have you lived at Church Cottage, Mr. Lumsden?
More than 40 years. Vera was born there.
Yes. And you're a widower, I believe. Hmm? How long have you lived on your own?
Oh, it's 5 years now since my wife passed on.
Yes. Do you live alone by choice?
Yes. Oh, Vera's always telling me I ought to go and live with her and Frank. But I like my independence.
Yes.
I don't like being beholden to anybody.
You're a self-reliant sort of man.
Yes, it's the best way.
Now, when you telephoned your daughter, after your no doubt uncomfortable night in your own garden shed, what exactly did you want her to do?
Well, I don't really know. You see, I didn't want to be a nuisance, but I couldn't think what to do. I thought, and the police were no help at all. I thought I might have a word with Frank.
Yes, your son-in-law.
Yes, but he wasn't there. So I told Vera, oh, I wish I hadn't.
Oh, now, please, don't distress yourself, Mr. Lumsden. Now, when your daughter told you that she was going to drive over and join you, did she mention a shotgun?
No.
So evidently she decided at the last minute, between talking to you on the telephone and jumping into the car.
Oh, really? Really, Your Honour?
That's all right, I withdraw that question, Your Honour. Now, Mr. Lumsden, when your daughter arrived at Church Cottage and you saw that she was carrying her husband's shotgun, did you then, or at any time subsequently, believe that the gun would ever be fired?
No.
I mean, did you even think it was loaded?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
Well, Vera never fired that gun. She never touched it. It was Frank who was the only one that used it. And he kept it for the rabbits.
Yes, I see. Now, is your daughter a hot-tempered person?
No, she isn't. She's always been a quiet girl. Never quarrels with anybody.
Would you say she was a vindictive sort of person, the sort of person who make a point of getting even with someone?
No. She's not like that.
And finally, Mr. Lumsden, from what you know of your daughter, is she capable of deliberately injuring another person?
Oh, no, if you knew her, you'd know she couldn't do it. She's a little lamb. Has been ever since she was a little girl.
Now, Miss Stone, you were one of a group of university people, were you not, who formed a squatters' association?
Yes. The idea was simply to find accommodation for homeless families in property that was standing empty or not being used to meet genuine housing needs.
And in pursuance of this aim, last August, this group turned its attention to holiday cottages in the rural area north of Fulchester.
Yes. There are several that stand empty there most of the year, and some of us regard that as an obscenity, when there are families with no decent home of any sort.
Yes, well, evidently you feel very strongly about this. But how did Mr. Lumsden's cottage come into your sphere of operation?
It was a mistake. We were told about Church Cottage, Mr. Lumsden's house, and when we scouted around there was obviously nobody living there. But in fact, we'd been told about the wrong house. There's another place about 2 miles away called Church House. That is a holiday cottage.
I see. And you moved into Church Cottage on August the 12th?
Yes. On that day, members of the group moved into 5 empty houses. John Worsley and I moved into Church Cottage.
I see. And on the following day, the 13th, Mr. Lumsden came back to his home to find you installed?
Yes. At no time did Mr. Lumsden ever say, or John and I ever realized, that this was truly his home. It was a failure of communication.
Moving on to the events of August the 14th. On the morning of that day, you became aware of a car driving up to the cottage, did you not?
Yes.
What time is that?
About 9:30, or a little before. We were expecting some friends from Fulchester to drive out bringing a family to take over the cottage, but not as soon as that. So when I heard the car, I remember looking at my watch, thinking that they were arriving early.
And was it your friends?
No, anything but. The car pulled up and a woman got out. She was carrying a shotgun.
And do you see that woman in court now?
Yes, the prisoner, Mrs. Chadwick.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and what happened then?
Well, of course, at that time we had no idea who she was, except that she was obviously a friend of the old man, Mr. Lumsden, because of the way they greeted each other. They talked for a bit, then they walked up to the house, to the front door.
I see. And was Mrs. Chadwick still holding the gun?
Oh, yes. She kept hold of it all the time. I was keeping a very wary eye on it from the upstairs window.
Mm-hmm. Please continue.
Well, Mrs. Chadwick, banged on the front door with her fist and started cursing and making threats. I told her she was breaking the law, but she took no notice.
What threats did she make?
She said if we didn't get out of the house, we'd be sorry. I told her that we weren't coming out, but it was obviously no good reasoning with her. She was in a fury. She said, "You'll regret this, lady. I will see to that."
And did you take the threats seriously?
Oh, yes. We were obviously dealing with a very aggressive person. I felt quite sure, and so did John, that she would dearly love to get her hands on us, and she handled that shotgun as if she knew all about guns. In fact, John thought we ought to ring the police.
I see, so it was Mr. Worsley who said that he thought you should telephone the police.
Yes.
But you didn't.
No. I realized it would be a mistake.
In what way?
Well, it was probably just what these people, Mrs. Chadwick and her father, wanted. If we rang the police and told them there was going to be trouble, it could have given the police just the excuse they wanted to force an entry and get us out, ostensibly to prevent a breach of the peace.
I see. And what happened then?
Well, eventually, Mrs. Chadwick stopped hammering and cursing, and they both went back to the car. They went behind the car into some trees so that we couldn't see them. Then, about 15 minutes later, Mr. Lumsden appeared again on his own and walked up to the front door. He was carrying a heavy stick. There was no sign of Mrs. Chadwick. Obviously, she'd crept round to the back of the house under cover.
Miss Stone, you must confine your evidence to that which you actually witnessed.
Miss Stone, what happened then?
Mr. Lumsden started beating on the front door. We went downstairs and pushed a chest of drawers behind the door. Then we heard a crash at the back of the house. I told John to stay by the front door, and I ran through to the kitchen.
And when you reached the kitchen, what did you see?
The back door was falling in. She'd bashed it off its hinges. Mrs. Chadwick. The door swung open, and in she came.
Now, Miss Stone, I want you to answer this very carefully. Was the accused holding the shotgun when she came into the house?
Yes.
And how was she holding it?
When the door swung open and she was still outside, I saw that she was holding the gun the wrong way around, with the butt end towards me.
As if she'd used it to batter on the door?
Yes. But then, as she stepped into the kitchen, she reversed the gun so that she was holding it in the usual way, pointing it at me, in fact. I felt sure she intended to shoot me.
Miss Stone, you mustn't tell us what you felt. You must tell us only what you saw or what you heard. Now, do you understand that?
Yes, I see.
Miss Stone, what did you do?
I shouted at her. I don't remember exactly what I shouted. Something like, "Get out," I think. Then John came running into the kitchen behind me. I saw Mrs. Chadwick turn towards him and raise up the gun. I shouted, "Don't shoot!" And then I saw her pull the trigger.
You saw her pull the trigger?
Yes. She did it quite deliberately.
That's not true. I didn't.
Silence.
It's a lie!
Mrs. Chadwick, you must be quiet. You'll have every chance to give your own account, but until then you must neither speak nor intervene. Do you understand?
Yes.
Now, Miss Stone, you say you saw the accused point the gun at John Worsley and pull the trigger.
Yes.
And this was a deliberate act.
Yes.
Thank you, Miss Stone.
Miss Stone. Now, you are what one might call the moving spirit in this sad case, are you not?
I really don't know what you mean by that.
I mean that but for your actions, the grim sequence which has led to this courtroom would never have begun. An old man would not have been locked out of his own home. And your young lover and disciple John Worsley would never have been maimed. An ordinary housewife and mother would not be facing grave charges. Well, Miss Stone, do you accept any responsibility for this chain of events?
Certainly not.
What, you feel no guilt for your part in this sad affair?
I do not.
No remorse?
Of course not.
Well, what do you feel?
As regards this case, or your questions?
Perhaps you'd care to tell the court your views on both.
As regards this case, I'm extremely sorry that John Worsley has been so badly injured, and I hope that justice will be done.
Yes, I hope so too. And I intend to show, if I can, not only your responsibility for this affair, but that your evidence regarding the shooting of John Worsley is a travesty of the truth.
And that, of course, is what you're paid to do.
No, in that you are mistaken, Miss Stone. But let's consider another of your mistakes. Your decision to squat in Mr. Edward Lumsden's cottage. Now, you were the brains behind the August campaign to squat in holiday cottages, were you not?
If you like. I'm certainly not ashamed of it.
Yes. Well, you've been prominent, have you not, in a number of other campaigns involving direct action. For instance, 2 years ago, when demonstrators at Fulchester University occupied the administrative block.
The sit-in? Yes, I took part in it.
Oh, I fear you're too modest, Miss Stone. You had a leading part, didn't you?
I suppose you would call it that.
Yes. Yes, and last year, were you not the member of a committee formed to prevent, by forcible means, a politician whose opinions that you found distasteful from speaking to a university society?
Yes, I was. I don't believe that fascists are entitled to spout racialist poison in public.
Now, Miss Stone, correct me if I'm wrong, but on these two occasions, these two demonstrations that I've mentioned, some of the demonstrators were subsequently convicted in the magistrate's court on various charges, weren't they?
Yes, that's true. But I wasn't among them.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Yes, I find that most illuminating. Yes, you've admitted the fact, indeed gloried in it, that you've played a prominent part on these occasions. But you never figure in the casualty lists of these glorious battles, do you? No, it's always someone else who gets hurt, isn't it?
It isn't like that at all.
Huh? Isn't it? Isn't this sad affair, the wounding of John Worsley, merely the latest in the line? Wasn't John Worsley just another piece of cannon fodder in your private war against society, Miss Stone?
That's utter
Your
rubbish.
private war against society. Isn't that what you spend your life conducting?
I want to change things, certainly. Anyone whose mind is not utterly closed knows very well there are many things wrong with our society that demand to be put right.
So you start by locking out a totally inoffensive old man out of his own home?
I have already explained quite plainly that was a mistake.
Oh, yes, a failure of communication, I think you called it.
Yes, exactly.
But by communication, Miss Stone, do you mean yourself talking and everybody else dutifully listening?
Not at all.
You didn't listen to Mr. Lumsden, did you? When he pleaded with you to let him into his own home.
Yes, of course I listened. It just so happens that Mr. Lumsden didn't make the right noises. He never at any time said that the house wasn't his holiday cottage. He was practically incoherent.
Well, perhaps that's not unexpected in a gentleman of 74 who finds that his home has been snatched away from him.
I do appreciate that you wish to distract the attention away from the fact that your client shot John Worsley. But is it absolutely necessary to tug at the jury's heartstrings quite so monotonously?
No, don't worry. I haven't forgotten the shooting of John Worsley. No, we shall come to that very soon. But first, you see, I'm interested in your attitude to the law. Now, I mean, you're quite an expert, aren't you, on the laws regarding squatting?
We were rather pleased with our performance. The laws on squatting are full of pitfalls for the unwary.
Yes, but whatever else you are, Miss Stone, you're not one of the unwary, are you? You're very shrewd, very bright, very quick to see an advantage.
I'm sure you don't mean any of that as a compliment.
You told my learned friend here that when Mrs. Chadwick, holding a shotgun, was knocking on the front door of her father's cottage, John Worsley wanted to phone for the police. But you vetoed that idea, didn't you, Miss Stone? That was your quick thinking, wasn't it? Because it might have given the police an excuse to eject you. But if the police had been called, then John Worsley would never have been grievously injured, would he?
In a hypothetical set of circumstances, no one knows what would have happened.
But you stopped John Worsley summoning the police. And then later, when Mr. Worsley lay bleeding on the kitchen floor, your adroit brain began to work overtime. The question, was it not, was how to extract Margaret Stone from the situation with the least trouble.
What you're saying has absolutely no connection with reality.
The defendant, Vera Chadwick, did not know the gun that she was carrying was loaded, Miss Stone. John Worsley's shooting was a sheer accident with a major responsibility yours. Now, I suggest to you, Miss Stone, that your account of the shooting is cunningly designed to shift the blame away from yourself.
Definitely
not. Your evidence regarding the defendant's actions, the aiming of the gun, the deliberate pulling of the trigger, well, it's a complete fabrication, is it not?
No.
Just the latest example of your guiding principle. It doesn't matter who gets hurt or who carries the can, as long as it isn't Margaret Stone.
The jury in this case is composed of members of the general public. The Queen against Chadwick will be concluded tomorrow in the Crown Court. Vera Chadwick is accused of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm to John Worsley, one of two young squatters who took over her father's cottage. The other squatter, Margaret Stone, is in the witness box where she's been facing a long and searching cross-examination.
Now, when the police carried out their examination of the shotgun, a great many of your fingerprints were found on it, were they not?
Yes, of course they were. Because after Mrs. Chadwick shot John, she dropped the gun on the floor. I picked it up and took it out of the house. I gave it to the police when they arrived.
Did you make sure the gun was unloaded?
No, I didn't. I don't know anything about guns. I simply made sure it was kept away from her, Mrs. Chadwick. I felt that one shooting was more than enough.
Yes. But in fact, the police found that this double-barreled gun was empty. One shot and one only had been fired, so in fact only one barrel had been loaded.
Yes, I believe that is so.
Yes. Oh, it was so, Miss Stone. Yes, we've the police evidence on that. It's rather odd, don't you think?
In what way?
Well, if Mrs. Chadwick had come roaring along to her father's cottage intent on shooting up the squatters, and remember, she knew there was more than one, she'd have loaded both barrels, wouldn't you think?
Well, Your Honour, I really do object. My learned friend is asking the witness for guesswork, and tendentious guesswork at that.
Quite so. You really mustn't ask the witness to speculate on the thinking of the accused, Mr. Ferguson.
No, very well, Your Honour. Now, Miss Stone, you told my learned friend that when the defendant stepped into the kitchen with a shotgun, you told him, I felt sure she intended to shoot me.
Yes.
But she didn't shoot you, did she?
No. She shot John Worsley.
Yes, but at the time we're speaking of, Miss Stone, John Worsley had not entered the kitchen. You were alone with the defendant.
Yes.
So if she wanted to shoot you, there was nothing to stop her doing so, was there? Unless, of course, you seized the gun.
No, I never touched it.
Huh? Didn't you, Miss Stone? You told my learned friend. The door swung open and she came in. And my learned friend asked you how the defendant was holding the gun, and you replied the wrong way round, butt end towards me.
Yes.
Well, there is a contradiction here, isn't there? I mean, first you tell us that the defendant entered the kitchen carrying the gun the wrong way round, butt end towards you. Quite harmless. And then you claim that she was pointing the gun at you and you felt sure she intended to shoot.
There isn't any contradiction. Except, of course, for the one that you're trying to invent. She was holding the gun the wrong way around. Then she reversed it and pointed it at me. There's no contradiction. There's merely a time sequence.
Oh, I see. Yes, a time sequence, yes. Yes, and of course that sort of thing does take time, doesn't it, Miss Stone? Not a great deal of time, of course, but then we mustn't forget that you're a very quick-acting and quick-thinking person, as when you so quickly stopped your friend John Worsley from summoning the police. Well, I mean, do you see what I'm suggesting?
I don't, quite frankly.
Well, I'm suggesting that as Mrs. Chadwick stepped into her father's house with the shotgun reversed, you seized the gun and tried to take it from her.
Definitely not.
You saw your chance and you grabbed at the gun and you were still grabbing at it when John Worsley entered the kitchen.
No, I never touched that gun.
The defendant says that you dragged it from her.
I expect she does.
She says that you dragged it from her, and during the struggle, the gun went off and John Worsley was hit. Now, isn't that what happened, Miss Stone?
No, it isn't. I never touched that gun. Not till after John was shot. Mrs. Chadwick, she shot John.
Well, Miss Stone, I have only 2 questions for you arising out of my learned friend's long and elaborate cross-examination. And these are both very simple. The first one is this. Do you have any feelings of personal animosity towards the defendant or her family?
No, of course not.
Thank you. And the second question is, did you touch the accused or the shotgun she was carrying before Mr. Worsley was shot?
No, I didn't.
Thank you, Miss Stone. And that, Your Honour, is the case for the prosecution.
Thank you, Mr. Unwin. You may leave the witness box.
You are Vera Chadwick of Hilltop Farm, near Potterton.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure the jury realise that this is an ordeal for you, Mrs. Chadwick, but try and give the answers to your questions as clearly as you can. Now, you are a farmer's wife and the mother of 3 children?
Yes.
On August the 14th, at your home, did you receive a telephone call from your father?
Yes, about 8:30 in the morning. I knew straight away there was something wrong, because I heard the pips go and the money go in, and I wondered why he wasn't ringing from home. I'd made him have the phone put in a few years ago after my mother died.
Yes, what did your father say?
Well, he was upset. I couldn't make it out. Then he said something about some people taking his house. I couldn't grasp what he was saying. Then he said they were squatters. Well, then it dawned on me, because there'd been something in the paper the night before about some squatters interfering with people's property.
Yes, and what was your reaction?
Well, I told him we'd get the police. But my father said no, he'd already tried that and they wouldn't help.
Yes, well, was your father distressed?
Yes, he was. He was really upset.
Well, your father's an independent sort of a man, isn't he?
He doesn't like to ask anybody for anything. He doesn't like to be beholden, you see.
Yeah, so when he came on the phone to you with this problem, you knew it was serious?
Right away. And when he told me what had happened, and that he'd had to sleep in the shed, well, I was disgusted.
Did your father say how many squatters had entered his house?
I asked him that. I said, how many are there? He said he'd seen 2, a man and a woman, but he didn't know if there were any more.
Yes, but you knew from your father's account on the telephone that there were at least 2 squatters, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Mrs. Chadwick, you said that your first thought was to bring in the police, but your father told you already that he had no success with this, hmm?
Yes.
Well, was there anyone else that you could turn to? What about your husband?
He'd already left for the cattle market at Thelford. I'd no way of getting in touch with him.
I see. Now, did you leave the farm straight away?
Yes, right. No, wait a minute. I went out at back and locked up. That's when I thought of taking Frank's shotgun.
Oh, no, wait a minute. No, we come to the shotgun in due course. Now, apart from locking the house up, I mean, did you do anything else? Did you change your clothes, for instance?
No, I went just as I was.
Well, I see. Well, what were you wearing?
Well, I had on my old pinny. I just started baking, you see, when my dad rung up.
Yes, that's right. You've three children, I believe. Didn't you have to make arrangements about them?
No, they'd all gone off to school. The youngest is 8 now, and I didn't know I wouldn't be coming back.
Yes, I see. Yes, well, I'm sure the jury will take note of that, Mrs. Chadwick. Now, Mrs. Chadwick, tell us about your husband's shotgun.
Well, he keeps it in his office. It's not really an office, not like a proper office. That's what he calls it, because he does his paperwork there. It was standing there.
The shotgun?
Yes, it was standing in an umbrella stand we had given to us when we got married. I saw it when I went past to lock up at the back, and I thought I'd take it with me.
Why?
Like for protection. I didn't know who these people were in my dad's house. I didn't know how many there were or what they'd do. I thought if they saw the gun, they wouldn't start anything.
Now, Mrs. Chadwick, did you load the gun?
No, I didn't.
So, in other words, when you picked up the shotgun, one barrel was loaded already?
It must have been, but I didn't know that.
Yes, are you used to handling this gun, Mrs. Chadwick?
I've never touched it. Well, I've moved it now and then when I've been cleaning, but I've never had a go with it, never fired it or anything.
So you're telling us, on oath, that you had no knowledge that the shotgun was loaded?
Yes.
And your sole purpose in taking it with you was as some sort of protection, a visual deterrent, if you like, against these possible rough treatment from these people? An unknown number, but at least 2 of them occupying your father's house?
Yes.
Now, Mrs. Chadwick, after the squatters refused point blank to leave the house, you decided to break in at the back door,
Yes.
And you sent your father to bang on the front door as a sort of diversion.
Yes.
Did this plan of yours succeed?
Well, I knew that door was practically off its hinges because I'd been on it in my father to do something about it the last time I was there.
Yes. Now, to force the door in at the hinge side, you used the shotgun, didn't you? As a sort of battering ram,
Yes.
Yes. You struck the door a series of heavy blows with the butt end of the gun.
Yes.
Well, that's an extremely dangerous thing to do, isn't it, with a loaded shotgun?
I suppose it is, but I didn't know it was loaded.
Exactly. You didn't know that it was loaded. Now, Mrs. Chadwick, having forced the back door, you stepped inside the kitchen.
Yes.
Was anyone in the kitchen?
Yes, that girl, that Miss Stone.
Huh? What happened then?
Well, as I went in, she grabbed at the gun. I was still holding it backwards way round, you see, from how I'd been hitting the door. She grabbed hold of it and tried to take it off me.
Well, Miss Stone tried to take the gun away from you?
Yes.
Why? Was the gun pointing at her?
No, it was more pointing at me because of the way I'd been holding it, you see.
I see. So she tried to take the gun from you. Then what?
Well, she grabbed at it and it went off. It went off and then the young man was bleeding. He must have just come in as the gun went off. I hadn't seen him till then. I didn't know it was loaded. I wish to God I'd never seen it. I didn't know the young lad was going to get hurt.
Yes, that's all right. Thank you, Mrs. Chadwick. Would you wait there, please?
You know, this version of the affairs that you've been giving us, Mrs. Chadwick, is rather like that old song, isn't it? I didn't know the gun was loaded.
It's true.
And that is what you're asking us to believe.
Yes, because it's the truth.
And even if you had known it was loaded, you didn't deliberately aim and fire at Mr. Worsley. Now, is that the story that you're telling us?
Yes, because it's the truth.
But it isn't your original story, now is it? You gave the police a completely different version.
No, I didn't.
What, do you deny then making a statement to Inspector Thompson just a few minutes after the shooting?
I don't remember much about it.
Really? Well, is your memory so short? I mean, Inspector Thompson did give evidence earlier in this case, did he not? Now, let me remind you. He told us how he found you in the kitchen beside the injured Mr. Worsley. I will quote what he said. I said to her, "What has happened here?" And she replied, "I have killed him. Oh, God, I have killed him." Well, Mrs. Chadwick, tell us, is that what you said? come now, Mrs. Chadwick. Did you say to the inspector, "I have killed him"?
I don't know.
But you heard the inspector give in his evidence that you said it. Are you suggesting that he lied?
No, I must have done, but I didn't know what I was saying.
You mean you didn't have sufficient time to think of a story that might save your bacon?
No, if I said it, it was because I was confused.
You were confused. And yet, just a few minutes later, the inspector asked you, and again, I will quote from his testimony, "Did you shoot him?" And she replied, "Yes, it was me." Well, now, Mrs. Chadwick, were you also confused when you said that to the inspector?
I must have been.
Well, then you admitted then that you said it. You said, "Yes, it was me."
Yes, if the inspector says I did, but I didn't know what I was saying. I was all upset. I didn't know what had happened or how it had happened. I was upset.
I see. Well, you were in fact so upset, I suggest, that you told the plain, sad truth, which is that in anger, you took your husband's shotgun, you loaded it, and that later, still in anger, you fired it at one of those intruders in your father's house.
No, it wasn't deliberate.
But you took that gun and you loaded it, did you not?
No.
And in a moment of fury, you aimed that gun and you pulled the trigger.
No, I didn't. I didn't load it, and I didn't know it was loaded, and I didn't fire it on purpose.
I see. Well, now, let us try to establish what you did intend to do on that day. Now, when your father rang up and told you what had happened, you were angry, were you not?
Yes.
Yes, well, that's a very natural reaction. Quite normal. Were you frightened?
No.
Ah, so on your own admission, you took your husband's shotgun in a mood of anger and not of fear. So, Mrs. Chadwick, you took that gun for attack and not for defense.
I took it just in case. I suppose I was frightened, really.
Oh, really, Mrs. Chadwick, you know, first you say you weren't frightened, and then you say you were. You know, you do adapt your story according to how you see your advantage now, don't you?
No, you get me mixed up.
But you told us earlier that not only had you never fired that gun, but that you didn't even know how to load it.
Yes, that's right.
Well, you know, I find that an extremely surprising story, Mrs. Chadwick. I mean, here you are, a farmer's wife, the sort of woman who can turn her hand to any job about the farm, milks the cows, bakes the bread, drives a car, wrings a chicken's neck, I shouldn't wonder. You do kill chicken, don't you?
Well, I have done.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. Yes, you're a sort of woman who can turn her hand at any job. And yet you're asking us seriously to believe that you don't even know how to load a shotgun.
I've never been interested. I've never wanted to shoot anything.
Not even when you found your father's house occupied by squatters?
No.
Well, then, will you please tell me, Mrs. Chadwick, when you drove to your father's house, taking that gun with you, and you marched so boldly up to the door and confronted these intruders, just what did you hope to achieve?
I don't know, really. I didn't stop to think about that. I was just so disgusted with these people, I wanted to give them a piece of my mind.
Which, of course, you did.
Yes, I did. I told them they were no better than thieves.
I see. And did you tell them, Mrs. Chadwick, that if they didn't get out of your father's house, they would be sorry?
I might have done. But I didn't mean... Well, what I did mean was that I'd get the law onto them, something like that.
Ah, but you didn't mean that, now, did you? Because what you proceeded to do was to take the law into your own hands, now, wasn't it?
I just wanted to get in the house. They'd no right to keep my father out of his own house.
I see, but did you understand, Mrs. Chadwick, that by using force to gain entry to this house, you were breaking the law?
No, I didn't. I've heard that since, and I think it's ridiculous. It makes my blood boil. Somebody comes along and tells you can't break into your own property.
Yes, you're a strong believer in property rights, are you?
Yes, I am. People work hard for their homes, and nobody's entitled to take it off them.
I see. And so you decided to force your way in. But, you know, wasn't that a remarkably bold thing to do, Mrs. Chadwick?
How do you mean?
Well, I mean, surely you were taking a big risk, weren't you? I mean, here you are, a woman, aided by a 74-year-old man, proposing to burst into a house occupied by at least two people, possibly more than two.
I didn't stop to think about that. I just wanted to get inside.
You already knew that these people were no respecters of property. Now, why should they have any more respect for people? What made you so brave? was a shotgun, wasn't it?
No.
Yeah. You knew that gun was loaded, now didn't you, Mrs. Chadwick?
No, I didn't.
No, Mrs. Chadwick, you know, you really must. You really must tell the truth.
I have told the truth.
Well, surely the truth is that anger took hold of you, and we can all understand that. But you went for that shotgun and you loaded it.
No, I didn't.
And in a moment of terrible impulse, a moment of fury, a desire to punish, to hurt these people...
It's not true.
You deliberately fired that gun.
I wouldn't do a thing like that.
When Margaret Stone said you did.
She's lying. The wicked bitch is lying.
Every now and then I go down the big field with it. I generally hit something. Rabbits, mostly.
Yes. Yes, but on this particular occasion, Mr. Chadwick, you fired only one barrel.
Yes, that's right.
Did you hit your target?
Yes, it was a fine big rabbit.
So you fired one barrel only?
Well, yes, you've got to be careful. Price cartridges out these days.
Yes. Now then, Mr. Chadwick, are you normally careful with your shotgun?
Oh, yes, you've got to be careful. There's kids about, you see. Only this time I slipped up. I forgot and I left a cartridge in there.
Oh, why was that? Why did you forget?
Well, I just got back to the house and one of the kids came running up. He said one of the cows was badly. Well, I just put the gun down and forgotten about that cartridge in the excitement.
Yes, I see, yes. Now, Mr. Chadwick, your wife, has she, to your knowledge, ever fired your shotgun?
No, not her. Never.
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick.
Now, Mr. Chadwick, you really love your wife, don't you?
Well, yes, certainly.
You go to some pains to look after her?
Yes, I would.
Mm-hmm. Do your best to keep her out of trouble?
Yes.
Save her from something unpleasant, if you could.
Yes.
Such as a term of imprisonment?
Well,
yes. If necessary, would you tell a lie on her behalf?
Oh, no.
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick.
The vital elements of the offence are firstly that there must have been a wounding. Secondly, that wounding must have been inflicted intentionally. And thirdly, there must have been an intention to cause grievous bodily harm. That is, really serious harm. Now, certainly, Mr. Worsley was wounded, and badly. The vital question, you may think, is whether the gun which wounded him went off accidentally or whether it was fired deliberately. Now, if it was fired deliberately at Mr. Worsley, you may think, though this is a matter for you, you may think that the accused intended to cause him grievous bodily harm, because that is the almost inevitable result of such an act. Now, if, on the other hand, you think that although the accused pointed the gun at Mr. Worsley, she only intended to frighten him, then she would only be guilty of assault occasioning actual bodily harm. And lastly, if you think the accused did not point the gun at Mr. Worsley, that it did go off accidentally, then she is not guilty of any offence at all. Now remember, the prosecution have the task of proving their case and of proving it beyond all reasonable doubt. And if they do not, the accused is entitled to be acquitted. Now, will you please retire and consider your verdict?
All stand. The prisoner will stand. Will the form of the jury please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
Do you find the defendant, Vera Chadwick, guilty or not guilty of causing grievous bodily harm?
Not guilty.